What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to FudgeMuppet. I'm Scott, here with Michael and Drew as always for the Elder Scrolls podcast. Today we are talking all about a little bit more of a niche topic, but the Auriel and Mazkin, otherwise known as the Golden Saints and Dark Seducers. To lesser Daedra, very well associated with Shivering Isles and Sheogorath, but there is more to them than seems. So which one of you boys wants to start us off?
All right. Well, basically, as far as the Shivering Isles incarnations go, or the examples go, they're basically the guards. They've been seen at other points in the timeline and different examples, but just to kind of give you the mainstream view of them, they're basically the guards of either side of Sheogorath's realm. So you've got the Golden Saints of Mania, the Dark Seduces of Dementia, and they basically function to put lawbreakers in their place and keep the city safe and so on. They're involved in different events within the realm and different kind of, I guess, rituals, for lack of better words, such as helping you in Oblivion get the Flame of Agnon to relight the Great Torch, and they both kind of compete for the Mad God's favor. They want to be the favorite kid, basically, of Sheogorath. However, they are also found outside of the Isles. You can find them as just a generic enemy in Morrowind. You can summon them in Morrowind. In Elder Scrolls Online, we saw both of them doing various things. And in Battlespire, the Mazkin, or the Dark Seducers, were there as well. Looking slightly different, but they were there. And they have distinct personalities, and both of them also have a system by which the females are superior and the males are kind of looked down at as weak.
Yeah, because like when you played like the Shivering Isles, if you look at it's kind of like, I'm pretty sure they're even shorter, the male versions of them, and there's only like, I swear there's only one in the game that appears when you're defending. Oh my goodness, I've forgotten the name. But outside of New Sheoth, in the gate before. What's the area called again?
The Fringe.
The Fringe.
Yeah.
What is that? What the town is called as well?
Passwall.
Passwall. That's it. So you're defending Passwall from the
Knights
Jigalags
of Order
folks. Yeah, but there's this one male one, and I remember seeing. You can see the Golden Saint version or the Seducer, depending on who you pick. But the Seducer one, it's almost like this weird, like kind of like V-cut, like thing armor underneath their pecs. It's kind of it looks a little gimpy, but I feel like it's on brand for the rest of the Dark Seducer attire.
Yeah, all of them, the Golden Saints, the Dark Seducers, they're always kind of scantily clad. Less so in Elder Scrolls Online. I'm not the biggest fan, I will say, of the armors in the Elder Scrolls Online.
Yeah,
they're not terrible. Like, they're cool armors kind of in their own right. No, they are. Like, if you saw it on their own, if you had nothing to compare it to, it's not bad.
I mean, to be honest,
it didn't do the Shivering Isles justice, and I don't like the Dark Seducer's helmet, particularly in Elder Scrolls Online. It's a bit like big, almost like Falmer looking kind of.
ESO armor as a whole generally to me doesn't look as good. Like, even when you say, oh, that's a cool concept there, it could be executed better in a more in a realistic looking style.
It can be a little bit Warcraft, like across the board, a little bit too Warcraft for my taste.
But
they don't quite look so Daedric, I think, in the ESO. It just looks more like elaborate armor making rather than them being Daedric entities. And like the idea that females are so much stronger, it's like with the males, it pretty much seems like you've got your stereotypical female armor in old school fantasy, but just thrown on a dude. So it's like that's how little thought they get spared for them.
Yeah. Well, let's I reckon we'll break it up a bit. We'll talk about the Golden Saints first, then the Dark Seducers, and then we'll kind of connect it all, and we can talk about some of their, like, you know, speculated origins and stuff like that. So we'll start off with the Golden Saints, which is a term given to them for their beautiful and interesting looking appearance by mortals of Tamriel, but their sort of more accurate name is the Auriel.
And they also have cat eyes, aesthetically, which don't seem another thing doesn't seem to be present in Elder Scrolls Online, at least from pictures.
It doesn't look like it
that I can see. They look more normal.
But yeah, golden skin, the cat eye, so imagine Witcher eye, it looks like that. They sort of seem to be modeled off sort of elven aesthetics and so on, and, you know, combined with their avian sort of looking armor, and it's just they have a real regal, saintly looking appearance. But what's interesting, and you mentioned this briefly, but about their personality, they're quite, despite their benevolence, they kind of, in terms of appearance, they're quite arrogant and proud, and they kind of really don't like the mortal races. They see themselves above them, and it's just an interesting. Once again, I really like contrast, but it's an interesting thing to see that. It's kind of like the what would you call it? The negative aspects of being like a saint or a godly kind of thing, but you're above everyone else. It's kind of
they're incredibly egotistical.
It's a bit of a theme with Daedra that they're kind of, in some ways, mimicries of mortals, and they almost seem like a caricature of how you imagine arrogant, snobbish high elves.
Yeah,
for sure. And the other thing that's interesting about them is that that doesn't say explicitly that they're manic, but with them chosen as kind of the guards and kind of rulers in a way of mania, besides Shea Gorath, like they have higher hierarchy than everyone else. Yeah, and the Duke, really. But they like the bright colors. At least that's what Shea Gorath says.
Yeah.
He says, when you get the ability to summon them, says they like mania. They love the bright colors. Or something like that, which I find interesting.
Yeah, it fits.
Because about the Dark Seduces, he says they like the pain like of dementia. Like they're a bit masochistic.
Yeah, well, there's some interesting... So we could briefly talk about like Dark Seducers. They kind of almost look dark elven in appearance, like the greyish sort of skin, but they're a little bit different, and then they've got their armor and so on. But they've been said to be, like you were just saying, masochistic, kind of, which, you know, we can look into that in a second. But also they're generally seen as, in contrast to the Golden Saints, as quite patient with mortals and willing to like to talk and a bit more nice, essentially. I guess you kind of need those to be a seducer. Like,
yeah, but
you don't want to...
polite. They're polite, and they don't come across as like seductive per se. They just come across as polite. And if you were to look at them in contrast, and this is a big assumption, right? But you could say perhaps the Golden Saints are more domineering. Like if you wanted like the other side, or like inflicting pain.
Like if you were to play on that sadomasochism kind of thing, if you do the two halves of the mind, like giving pain, taking pain, and you have the Dark Seducers being masochistic, you could see how a sadistic sort of thing would fit the traits of proud, arrogant, and hating lesser races and stuff like that, and then, you know, smiting them with their glory kind of thing.
Especially when you look at that, I think it's Legends art that you put in the chat.
Yeah.
It almost looks like holding like a like a paddle almost, like. but
naughty boy.
But actually, like the way it's a mace, right?
Yeah.
The way that mace is held.
Yeah.
But then you get a seducer who's got a fire whip as well, so maybe they just use it on themselves.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. But so, like, while we mention that, we can just sort of segue into, there are some like notable characters among them, and one of them is Starter, who's a very notable. She's the Golden Saint commander, and she's actually showed up in Morrowind, Oblivion, and ESO. Now, you'll see on wikis and stuff, they include her as the Creation Club stuff. Like there's a Creation Club DLC called Saints and Seducers, and that adds them into the stuff, and that adds their own bit of lore. We can talk about these things, but I don't feel it's necessarily canon. Like, they're kind of, I get the vibe from some wikis and so on, just because there are things like, you know, Christmas themed things in Creation Club, or Dwemer mud crabs, or like zombie apocalypse. I don't think it necessarily makes it canon.
The other thing is it kind of, at least to me, contradicts the already established lore as well. Like, for example, when you look at something like the amber found in the Shivering Isles, right?
Yeah.
It didn't say, you cannot get this anywhere else in the Elder Scrolls universe, but it was, at least to me, pretty implied that this is a special type of amber from the Shivering Isles that's produced by the special trees in the Shivering Isles and the root systems that kind of push their way underground. And as they push their way underground, breaking through like rock and dirt and all these like materials, they can become kind of like split or broken, and this amber, this kind of sap inside, can leak out. Like the idea is that you can't just walk up to one of these trees with a pickaxe or a sword and put a hole in it and start taking out the amber. Like, and to me, at least, it was kind of implied that that's why you can make amber armor and weapons in the Shivering Isles with these, by the way, master secrets from this master Shivering Isles smith, who was given the knowledge of how to do this by like their master and so on.
And that's
so
where
then
it
the fact
comes...
that you can just get Amber in Skyrim Creation Club and make Amber armor. It's a bit
and that's
like,
where it comes down to. It is a mod, so like it might be well done, but it's not necessarily perfect in all of its like application of everything, and that's why I don't think it is canon. I still treat them as mods because that's what Creation Club is. It's like paid mods. They're just licensed through Bethesda, but I don't know.
I find it similar with ESO. There's a lot of stuff that is more of just like a reference to the lore. So, for example, I'm fairly sure you can get a mount in ESO that's like it's the Wild Hunt, the Bosmeri Wild Hunt, which is something that's supposed to be, you know, a great catastrophe that happens once in a very, very rare blue moon. Yet you can just have a mount that is like a manifestation of the Wild Hunt. It's like these are cool references to the lore, but sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah, it's kind of like you get a whole bunch of skins on the mount. Like you get like Storm Atronach horse, like Wild Hunt Gua, or like all this stuff. It's like
it's the separation you got to do between like what is sort of like lore and then what is just made for a game. Like it is an MMO. Like if I think to Elder Scrolls, I'm like, oh, what does this city in the Elder Scrolls, what does Mournhold look like to me in my head? Like I imagine a full city of Dunmer, like that looks like a real city. I don't imagine like all these people running around on like colorful mounts and going, yes, what quest today? Well, I'm going to do my dailies or whatever the hell they're doing, you know, or look what I bought in the Crown store. Like that's, you know, so yeah, so you got to separate the game elements.
Exactly, and in the most basic way, you could almost just say like game mechanics. You don't look at the land of Skyrim and go, everyone has a stamina bar, and once they run out, they can't do... Or like in Oblivion, be a better example, if you get too much stamina drained, you fall over. It's like, it's a gameplay mechanic. And I know, you know, mounts arguably are there in the game as physical things, but come on, we all know it's not canon.
Yeah.
I know it falls back on that, but it's just like, come on.
Yeah.
We know.
Well, so let's we'll bring it back to the Golden Saints. So we established that in both of the Golden Saints and Dark Seduces, they are matriarchal, and the males are lesser, and they even see themselves as lesser compared to the females.
Could I just interject here on that topic?
Yeah.
May as well before we go over it. I remember Drew made a video about the Golden Saints, and you were talking about how perhaps you know, because Daedra's kind of matter, I guess, or we'll just say soul for lack of better words for now, kind of goes back to be born again, that the males could actually just be ones that didn't prove themselves or ones that were less valiant. So the idea is that, like, it's just speculation. Perhaps you could be put into the male inferior form depending on the actions you had in that last cycle.
Yeah, well, like, no matter how similar they may look, their Daedra are just a completely different beast altogether to our rules of biology. So I imagine we'll talk a lot about the wells in Brelak and God, what's the other place called?
Pinnacle Rock.
Pinnacle Rock, that's the one. So like the chaotic creation that they come from, and it can have a role in not only their structure of society, but also their identity. Like I've got a fairly strong theory that they kind of developed a very distinct identity in the Shivering Isles that isn't really seen in the same race elsewhere, which will be something we'll talk about.
Well, I mean, let's just go into it then, I guess. Like, so there's one piece that I think that's good to preface this all with, because there's conventional sort of ideas that implied by the line, like by from Sheogorath saying was it from a Dark Seducer about what Sheogorath said?
So a Dark Seducer, so basically they have their wellspring in the Shivering Isles at Pinnacle Rock, and the Dark Seducers can say, Sheogorath is our lord, ruler of the Shivering Isles, but then it is by his whim that the Maz can walk, and we serve our master to the death. Yeah. So whether he actually creates them or they just use the workings of Pinnacle Rock to enter the realm from another realm, using this as one of many well springs perhaps that they have in other places, we don't know. Well, but at least that sentence implies.
So this is, there is a thing on the Imperial Library, which is, it's a post from a forum on the Bethesda forums in 2007. It's called Interview with Two Denizens of the Shivering Isles, and it's an interview with Haskell and Dias. And Haskell is the Chamberlain of Sheogorath, and Dias the Chamberlain of Jigalag.
Wow, 2007.
Yeah, so the interviewees of this interview were being played by Kurt Kuhlman, one of the designers, and Bruce Nesmith, another one from Bethesda Softworks. So when the one quote that... So it's basically fans asking questions, and they're answering in character, like they do in those the ESO ones, the Loremaster archive ones. So it would be like, so you can take this as a reasonable amount of canon, I sort of think, But anyway, have a listen. So this is the question. So it goes, Haskell, for a long time it was assumed that the Dark Seducers were minions of your lord's unbrother Mehrunes Dagon. However, we find them here in the Isles, dutifully guarding the lands of Dementia, and they seem to have been doing so for a long time already. Have the loyalties of the Seducers always been this divided, or has the Mad God's charisma persuaded a few of these fine specimens to work in his service? Now, this is Haskell's reply. He says, how typical. You mortals love to take a pebble of information and construct entire realms of conjecture upon it. Your lore of those disparate beings that you lump together as Daedra is based on nothing. Lies and half-truths told by traitors, rebels, miscontents, and weaklings who have had the misfortune to become involved with mortals, or with Mehrunes Dagon. Do not speak his name to me again, the master of scum, the pawn of every prince of true power, the dupe of every schemer in the 19 voids. Do you think you know anything of the politics, factions, feuds, vendettas, wars of oblivion? Do you think oblivion's such a simple place that the tale of loyalties of a great people, such as the Mazcan, could be encompassed in a brief tale? Excuse me, I seem to become rather excessive. I'm usually better at controlling myself. Forgive me. Pray continue with this most enthralling conversation. Anyway, all of that essentially serves to sort of cast some doubt on the idea that it is simple as like, oh, Sheogorath just made them. And in the same way that the Daedra, look, you can divvy up the description of made as much as you want, but they don't make in the same way that the Aedra gave part of their own beings to basically create, or their own power to make other souls, sort of like derivatives of themselves. So the Daedra sort of corrupt and manipulate, but that's such a broad realm of possibilities anyway. Like you can see as with the Daedra, but so that's a nice preface to sort of establish that obviously Haskell and people within the realm of Daedra sort of know that it's more complicated than just that.
I find it really cool as well how he calls the Mazcan a great people. Like there's like a lot of respect there for this race, like just like a Tamrielic race might have for another one.
Well, if you throw in the idea, if you do buy into the Mythic Dawn commentaries and that Tamriel and Mundus is just another plane of oblivion, it was Lorkhan's plane of oblivion, but they betrayed him, that the Aedra betrayed him and so on. It kind of like, you can kind of really envision the other Oblivion, Infinite Realms of Oblivion as like, there's the people of all the different realms, just as the same as there's the people of Tamriel. Like,
but why are they also obsessed with Tamriel then?
but you only see, it seems they're
Yeah,
obsessed,
I know.
but you
I
don't
know.
see all the ongoings of everything else behind it. That's why I like when you get little like, Shivering Isles, you get bits of society and civilization in these Daedric realms. But I guess so who wants to take, someone else can talk about...
My theory on all of this, and the reason why they seem to have loyalties to Sheogorath, is like when I think about chaotic creation, so it's like it's just unrefined chaos. In Molag Bal's realm, you see it as like pools of azure plasm is what it's called, and basically in chaos, if a Daedra is killed, they're reborn from this chaos, and it's like they return to the void and then come back, and there's a lot of, it's very messy basically. So when I think of Sheogorath kind of like essentially being a patron or a father to them, it's like he provided them these secure means of being reproduced, essentially, like by giving them these well springs where they can be reborn. They've kind of, the ones who come back here, developed a very specific identity that aligns with him and his realm. That's how so that to me explains why you see Seducers and Dark Seducers prior to the Shivering Isles DLC that seem nothing like the Dark Seducers in the Isles.
Yeah, it's sort of like directing, giving them a purpose. Rather, it's kind of like creating a societal structure almost in the magical tools to direct the pre-existing race rather than creating the race So
it's like having in the real world, having a race or a culture that is vastly different to their own people because they were born into a different society. Like say it's people born in America versus people born in Britain or something like that. They kind of become completely isolated even though they're born from the same stock or whatever.
Yeah.
There's some quotes as well, actually. Both the commanders of either the Golden Saints or the Dark Seducers will say Brelak or Pinnacle Rock was given to us by our Lord Sheogorath as a sanctuary and a place of restoration. And then if you talk about the wellspring, they say, the darkness is a frightening place, even to us. And so our Lord has given us this beacon, a light to guide us back to him. And then you can also hear the dialogue from other saints and seducers. The waters of oblivion lead us to the wellspring, where Lord Sheogorath has given us a place to return to his service. So like you're saying, it's not necessarily like 100% that he like created them and that's like their origin story. It kind of sounds like, he guides them back to his realm, provides them with these places of restoration and a place for them to come back into form.
A similar way to think about it is how you sort of have the Dremora, and there's clans of Dremora, but they will be found in different realms and serving different princes, or scamps, or ogrims, or twilights. Like, even though some have more heavy associations, such as the winged twilights with Azura, you still find twilights with others. Or, for example, Boethia's Hungers. I'm pretty sure it was Boethia that created the Hungers, supposedly, or is most associated with.
Correct.
But you find them in the Shivering Isles.
Yeah.
So it's that sort of, the Daedra, as all of those lesser Daedra kind of have a bit more autonomy to seek their masters.
And it can get really confusing because if you take the Shivering Isles, for example, the Hungers really look like they belong there. I mean, if you go and explore that place, besides the fact that there's plenty of them, the Zealots can summon them. What's the other class in the game? There's the Zealots and then the
Heretics.
Heretics. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the Zealots. One of them summons them. And then, most of all, they're built into the architecture. So you will find statues of Hungers, with their mouths and heads pointing out off the edge of Shivering Isles ruins. You will find traps set up in these, kind of ancient-looking halls that shoot a magical damaging blast from the mouth, coming from the shape of a hunger. So you can understand the confusion that people really have about not just Golden Saints and Dark Seducers, but any of the Daedra and where they're from and what their origins are, because they seem really well and truly spread out. And I guess we could talk about that now, other examples of where the Golden Saints and Dark Seducers have been before.
Just to add some extra clarification, I think it's helpful that a lot of people, when they typically think of gods or super powerful beings, they believe they see it as the sort of the Adric pathway, which is like God at the top gave up their powers, created less powerful beings and less and less and less till they resort to breeding. So it's all derivative of, you have God creator and then the things that come. Whereas all of the Daedric princes and stuff, supposedly for the most part, there's variations, but it sort of have just sort of always been there, and arguably a lot of the lesser Daedra as well. Like, for example, like Dremora aren't necessarily a derivative of Mehrunes Dagon or anything. They're just serving Mehrunes Dagon. They themselves, though, were formed from the chaotic creation that just came from the existence that is Padme and stuff like that. So really, if you kind of... There's a lot more individuality amongst the Daedra, and then you have like sort of demi-princes, because really Daedric prince just means the most powerful that runs a realm of oblivion, and arguably at times they're not even necessarily Daedric princes, because they're like Meridia, who was a Magna Gi that just sort of rocked up and took the coloured rooms for herself, and carved out her own thing of oblivion. So then she becomes a Daedric prince, but do you know what I mean? So it's a lot of these terms, like... for people to understand, like Daedra and Adra and all of these terms are from a mortal's point of view, and they're rather arbitrary to define things. Like literally all Daedra and Adra means our ancestor or not our ancestor. So it's, that dichotomy, it's not the most descriptive definition. It's very loose,
100%.
And it's all from an elven view anyway. Adra Daedra is a elven dichotomy of things, but they've usually the magical types, so they've done the most research and all that kind of thing and established a lot of it.
Anyway, back to the Golden Saints, I did want to add in there is this little story which kind of puts them almost in a caring light, really. There's a character called Malkor Valos from the Elder Scrolls Online, and Malkor was born as an only child, and Malkor's mother was a wizard, right? And Maros was the name of the mother, summoned a Golden Saint. Oh, sorry, it's father? It says his. Anyway, Maros summoned a Golden Saint to protect and care for his son. Malkor was taken to the Shivering Isles and raised among the Golden Saints. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. After Maros was killed in a mage's duel. And then he learnt the principles of honor and duty, which seem to be, at least, a big part of being a Golden Saint, as egotistical as they are.
It's a cool backstory. Like, if that was like a bit
raised by a
cool
Daedra.
Yeah, but like, I wonder how much of that, the fact that he was raised so on is dependent. That, you know, when Maros summoned a Golden Saint to protect him, it was sort of like in the same way that it's not necessary when Daedra and that are summoned. It's not necessarily, you know, it's kind of against their will. Like, you're kind of just pulling them. It's like, oh, fight for me. You're kind of controlling them in that same way. Like,
raise my child. They're likely to kill your child depending on what Daedra it is.
But then, if you're going to go down the road that they're kind of like that Golden Saint was forced into it by the father, then it'd have to be a very powerful summons to maintain control over this Daedra for so long.
Even in
so it
death.
Seems like they've it seems really like
we said,
there's a commitment.
Like we said too, the Daedra, as they seem to be more individual than a lot of the time they're given credit for. So it could just be a Golden Saint that was particularly nice, or maybe respected the father or mother a lot and therefore did it as a big favor. You know, despite their sort of generalization, that is that they're arrogant and proud, which might be true most of the time, but, you know, exceptions just confirm.
Plus they rule over mania, you know, which is kind of, there's multiple sides to their personalities by definition.
Yeah.
You know, which Michael alluded at before. It's you know, they can be arrogant, but they look one way and they act a different way, and you know, so there's all of that.
I feel like too, it does kind of fit, I guess, like in the way that they're like proud and arrogant, in the way that, like, I feel like a lot of that could connect a bit to sort of the beauty and the, like they were described as, they like all of the colors and stuff of mania and so on. They can kind of see it as a bit of a
beautiful place. For sure. Anyway, speaking of them as individuals, you've got all the examples of the Mazkin and them serving different people throughout history. So in Battlespire, they were helping Mehrunes Dagon after betraying Nocturnal, which means they were helping Nocturnal and in her service, and then also in the service of Dagon. And back then, they definitely had a more... I guess not their dark purple skin tone, you know, a more like regular one, and looked more just like regular, you know, they just looked more regular, like humanoid. They didn't look like dark elf based or anything like that. And they had their special outfits. And
they had wings as well that they could spring out. Well, actually, it's interesting.
Some had
actually,
wings.
in battle,
I don't know all of them.
Yeah, well,
wings.
It's interesting. If you look at Daggerfall, they're called Daedra Seducer. In Battlespire, there's a Seducer, which is just like a scantily clad woman, and then there's Dark Seducer, which is a scantily clad woman with wings.
Yeah, that's it. And then Mehrunes Dagon actually took one as his lover, or paramour. Interesting word. And she wielded, I believe, the sword of the Moonreaver, which you go to get.
Interestingly, like that point, it's something else that just kind of, I guess your term, humanizes them or gives them more individuality, is when you kind of see that Mehrunes Dagon has a paramour and takes on, you know, just a Daedra, and there's similar stories with, you know, Molag Bal having a daughter and stuff like that. They do kind of still have like somewhat mortal relationships at times and so on, which kind of just, it kind of demystifies them a little bit. You know what I mean?
Spice things up a bit, you know, as eternal beings. It was like, oh, I'll try this human thing for 10 years and then
very brief.
Go back to being...
I won't touch on it too long, but it's like, it's the same idea, kind of like with Clavicus Vile being a super social being. That's why he split part of his power and gave some to create sort of Barbas as a distinct entity, so he could be social for all of life and have someone to talk with and complain about. And exactly. So, but that's kind of a very like human seeming trait. Like, they're not all as deep and esoteric as Hermaeus, more a big squid of knowledge kind of thing, you know? Like, but so Dark Seduces, yeah, they were in Daggerfall and Battlespire. Continue with your story.
And they were also in the Elder Scrolls Online helping Molag Bal with the plane meld and stuff like that. There was even a place called the Manor of Revelry, where there was Mazkin sisters who would honeypot their guests by giving them a luxurious experience and feeding them and who knows what else. And basically pampering them and fattening them up to lower their guards so that they can be consumed.
Oh, and there's two... As for some of the instances in Daggerfall, the Daedric quest for Malakath involves a Mazkin who betrayed Malakath, and because he was the Mazkin was gifted power by Malakath and then went off and betrayed him. And then you're basically sent to hunt down this Mazkin, you kill her, and then you get Volendrung in return. And there's also another sort of one where you're tricked by an orc warlord into taking a Daedric lodestone from a Mazkin, and a lodestone's like a kind of like a magnetic stone that they can use it in like navigation purposes and stuff like that. But yeah, you kind of see there, like there's Mazkin even being associated with Malakath and stuff, or like working with you see them kind of.
Haven't the Oriel even been associated with the coloured rooms?
The Aurorans, yeah. Yeah. So it seems like for both, there is evidence there to suggest the potential that Sheogorath has decided, he wants two distinct groups to rule the two sections of his province, his realm. And he's kind of like, yeah, like the Seducers, there's potential there, because the descriptions of the Dark Seducers we were just giving isn't really anything like the Dark Seducers we see in the Shivering Isles. And there's potentials that the Orioles do originate from the same place as the Aurorans.
This is probably pure canon. There's no necessarily evidence for it, but I do
pure canon.
Sorry, pure head canon. All the same. Canon, head canon. No. I like the idea that the Dark Seducers kind of could spring wings at any moment. Like it is a trait that's a Mazkin trait, but they just don't. Like, or you don't see it in game because of game limitations. But I like the idea that it is part of their sort of thing, that they do have wings that are just hidden and not sprung.
That is interesting, though, about the Golden Saints, right? Like, Brelak's their most sacred location. It's in the Shivering Isles. It has their wellspring there. But one of them does say that if Brelak were to fall, like this is quote, it would be the end for my kind. So that kind of puts a spanner in the works, because it sounds like if the Order win, the Golden Saints have just gone.
I mean, it depends how far you like my kind you can expand.
Yeah, I see that as a culture.
That's like, yeah, because you can expand that more to like just her kind, which are the ones that are in Shivering Isles, the Brelak, that kind of thing.
Or perhaps most of them are in the Shivering Isles, and there would only be... I don't know how it works with them coming back from the Waters of Oblivion and all this. But if they all died and their wellspring in the Shivering Isles died, perhaps the wellsprings in other places that may exist are like weaker or only facilitate less numbers of Golden Saints. It gets weird because then you have to think how Daedra work.
Well, because the general idea with the Daedra is that they're sort of...
unlimited.
Like a Daedric soul kind of thing, is that they enter the void, but then there's sort of... chaotic creation kind of comes around them and forms a morphotype, and they come back. So they generally have a tendency to sort of reform to similar things. So sort of like, because I guess they kind of have to be, because you need there's something to define the races or so on. So this is what makes a Mazkin or a Dremora or Zivalai or etc.
But do you think that, but with the wellspring corrupted by the Order or destroyed, that perhaps they would be trapped perhaps in that process? In the process, they could become trapped and unable to return in the same numbers. Because you could imagine, and it could just be, and I like the idea that it could just be a cultural thing, as in it's the end of our kind here at, the Shivering Isles, with our traditions and our rituals and our knowledge of all these different people, with the Flame of Agnon and all of that. There's obviously some kind of culture there that's unique to the Isles and those specific Golden Saints. But I do wonder what would happen to their souls if... It's just an odd way to put it,
I feel like their souls, or they're called vestiges, so that, like as their version of a soul, is like it's always there in the void to be kind of... I think it's almost like to be tapped by a Daedric prince, because the Daedric prince can choose a vessel to put these vestiges in, or kind of like create a mimicry of something and turn it into that. So if I hear that quote about the Golden Saints dying out, it's essentially like if they were all to disappear, Sheogorath's like his creation or his design, I'd say, that it's no longer there, but the vestiges, the souls, are still in the void, ready to return in some form or another.
Right, so it's kind of like deleting someone's 3D blueprint that they downloaded on, and then turning their internet off, and then basically they can use their 3D printer still, but they're not allowed to make what they were making before.
But you never know as well, because the Golden Saints, it could be quite literal for the Golden Saints, and then maybe some of them went off to Meridia's colored rooms and so on, but it could be they all originate in Shivering Isles, as opposed to, but not the case for the Dark Seducers. The Dark Seducers were another deal.
That's what I thought before.
I mean, so that's a pretty sound one as well.
But nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure.
As Haskell says, you think you can understand? We're too crazy.
Yeah, he personally attacks us. It's like, you mortals take this morsel of information and extrapolate it and make an entire career out of it. It's like...
And like, I don't want to go on too deep of a tangent, but Scott, when you mentioned before about the possibility that Mundus is just Lorcan's plane of oblivion, and people wonder about the connection between the Hist and the Daedra and Oblivion. But if you think about it, the same way we talk about this Azure plasm, this chaotic creatia, the Hist have their amber plasm, their Hist sap, which is kind of like, it's powerful in a way that seems really similar to the chaotic creatia. And they're like creating the Argonian form out of this, and it's like there's little bits and pieces. And it is just a
corrupted lizard, right? Argonians, and they corrupted off other forms of other things. They're like, well, let's give them wings or mammalian features or whatnot. So it is kind of inherently their creation is kind of like a bit of a
Daedric,
kind of Like
and the wellspring is kind of like the sinking down sap. And the Hist sap in the swamp and. Interesting. Whoa. This should have been in the Argonians podcast.
Yeah, you never know. You never know where a podcast's going to take you, huh?
I mean, I feel like all three of us have epiphanies mid-podcast, Like it's true, we discover things on this podcast that honestly, we did not plan to talk about.
I think, like, even as much as it's a service to you guys listening and, like, you guys enjoy just listening to the podcast and lore, it actually helps us a lot of the time because you're structuring and talking about your points in different ways and backing and forthing, and then all of a sudden you just have these epiphanies and they're like, oh, whoa, that makes sense or something. It's something you wouldn't have necessarily come to if you weren't having this kind of conversation already. So
and
they
are
useful.
Think of cool videos to write.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But
what else is there to talk about with the Golden Saints and the Dark Seduces?
I think we've hit a lot of the Seducers. I don't know how...
I can tell you one little detail. You can find a golden tooth of a Golden Saint in the Elder Scrolls Online. And it just interestingly mentions that it depicts an elderly man with 3 faces carved into the gleaming tooth. Kind of like Sheogorath and like the strange door.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Wabberjack.
I also like that the Mazkin attacking Battlespire, when they joined Dagon, they all started having Daedric Crescents. It's just a cool, like, kind of... It is the most, like, pulpy sort of thing, if you can imagine, like, them, and they're all scantily clad with these big, like, demon crescent weapons and stuff. It's, like, straight out of the 80s, kind of.
Are you thinking of that image with, like, the green background, and there's the Seducer holding up the crescent?
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It looks like what a bunch of people at a rock concert think they look like. Raise the crescents to the sky.
Yeah.
But
I think overall, as far as the Golden Saints and Seducers, I think they're all still in the new incarnation of the Shivering Isles with Champion of Cyrodiil, who became Sheogorath, and it's all fine and dandy. They're just still in that rivalry. But I feel like, once again, that rivalry is a very Shivering Isles contextual thing. Like, I don't know if a Golden Saint from the colored rooms would necessarily have a rivalry with a Mazkin serving someone else.
Oh, for sure, because they both absolutely want the affections, I guess, is a weird way to put it, but of Sheogorath, like when you become, because you're immortal, so even if you've saved Cyrodiil, they're not going to treat you with much respect, but when you become Sheogorath, they do.
Yeah,
and you can get away with like crimes type thing, and like it gets interesting. There's some interesting post game mechanics in the Shivering Isles that a lot of people aren't aware of.
Yeah, kind of I keep forgetting that, but like he became a god, or he or she or whoever's carried the hero of Kvatch became an actual god. Like all the Daedric Prince, like it's pretty insane
at least
level of power.
in Skyrim, you start as a god.
Yeah, well, true.
Kind of, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You're dragonborn
kind of thing,
basically from the get-go.
Yeah.
But
But yeah.
I think that wraps it all up, unless you two have anything to say. We knew this would be a slightly shorter podcast, but it's been a pretty interesting one.
Yeah. I only just final note is I just find that the Daedra, as we expand on the Daedra more and more and more throughout the games, it's just interesting to see more of their like society or individuality in the same way that it's really highlighted more so with the Dremora is the one example where they really like drill down into their like interactions and so on. But like even things with the Winged Twilight, like it was Molag Grunda, it was falling in love with a Frost Atronach and just all kinds of things. I love I just love the Daedra in general and all of their little connections.
Take the Daedra out of the Elder Scrolls universe and it gets a lot more boring, I'll say that.
They're boring.
They're like really intertwined with just about everything that's super awesome.
There is pretty much like, honestly, like, you know, Dark Elves, Khajiit, they're dependent on them. Like if you remove them, like the Oblivion Crisis, all of these
it's like super crucial, and that's why people love the Daedra so much. You know, if you make a video about Daedra, it will get a lot more attention pretty much than most other video types out there, and they're just so cool.
And by comparison, like to the Daedra, they have actual like defined personalities. They're not defined by the worshippers as much as they are themselves, and they kind of they're characters as opposed to just. You know, mystical construct.
In summary, we've taken a pebble of information and constructed entire realms of conjecture upon it, as we do.
As we love to do. And one final note, I guess, unless you two have anything else to say, is, and it's just a general knowledge note, but they're both of the Golden Saints and the Dark Seduces, they're very hierarchical. And they have ranks, all of them, with different names for the different ranks. I won't read them because they're all gibberish. Essentially. But, you know... Go check it out.
Do it. To finish off the video, list them all.
Oh, really?
God, yeah, do it.
Right. You're gonna make me do it.
Then we'll wrap up.
Sure. So for the Golden Saints, we've got from lowest to highest rank.
Yeah.
The Orin, the Oradel, the Ormok, the Ormokul, Orig, Malorig, Pelarig, and Ormazil. Which you just look at that and you see like. The Pokemon, like Urumazil or whatever it's called. Azumarill, that one. That's what I see when I read it.
Yeah.
And then the Mazkin. What are their ranks? Okay. Strict hierarchy. Kiskengo, Kiskella, Kiskadrig, Grakendo. Sounds like some Harry Potter spells, man. Grakella. Yeah. Grakadrig and Ort Kendo. That sounds like a martial art.
Yeah.
So there you go, everyone. Thank you very much for watching. We really appreciate it. If you want to help support this podcast, we've got a link to our merch down below. You can get a sick Daedric artifact, the coveted FudgeMuppet mask hoodie. And let us know in the comments what you want to see next. Follow us on Twitter, and we look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.